Afternoon, everyone. It's been a very long time since I've done a video like this. I've been very busy helping people, basically, and also teaching other therapists. It's kind of crazy times in the world. But I still want to help. I still want to help people to liberate their minds. So I know that not everyone can afford therapy, or they have reasons why they don't feel comfortable speaking to someone yet. So this is why I'm recording this video. So I want to do something that's like the most helpful information that I can give you, okay? And this video is going to lead into a series of videos that I've done that are very practical tools to help you to regain control of your thoughts and emotions. So on that note, let's talk about emotions and let's be a bit more specific. What are emotions? And if we really make this as simple as possible, they are chemicals that are released into the system, and as we feel those chemicals, those reactions happening, we basically experience what we would consider to be an emotional experience. And some of those experiences we then make meaning out of, because that's what our neocortex does. It makes meaning. And sometimes we say it's a good feeling or it's a bad feeling. I mean, the truth is all feelings are neutral in the sense that they're not good or bad. It's really about how we perceive it. And some people will reframe things, like you can say, the feeling that I experience on a roller coaster when I'm excited is actually the same feeling that I experience when I'm terrified, right? And it's just the meaning that makes the difference. But let's get more specific, these chemicals. So the thing with chemicals is, whether you call them peptides or you call them neurotransmitters or hormones, what their job is to create those feelings in order to, I suppose you would say, motivate us to do things, either to get out of bed. If it's, something like serotonin, it's going to motivate you to get up. It's going to wake you up, get you out of bed, feeling good, regulate your mood. And in the case of things like stress hormones, they are things like adrenaline, which get you moving, and because it's a kind of a jolt to kind of get us moving, and then the cortisol, which keeps us moving, right? Because it turns everything into sugar and it helps us keep running or keep fighting or whatever it might be. However, because they are chemicals and those chemicals are being used, eventually they're going to get used up. All right. So this is good news, because depending on whether you want more of that chemical or you want to stop that chemical because it's not particularly making you feel good, because again, everything that our unconscious mind and body does has a positive intention. Right? Now, I know that may not feel like it when you're feeling stressed out or anxious or whatever it might be, or depressed. I mean, actually, when you're depressed, you're not creating any chemicals at all, which is why when you go to your doctor and they give you some tablets, what those are substitutes for those chemicals, things like serotonin. So the positive intent might be that, when it comes to stress hormones or anxiety, things like that, it's move away from that. That could be a potential threat. So move away from it. Your body is trying to keep you safe, and it's using those chemicals, as we said, to keep you moving and all the rest of it. But these chemicals will eventually run out. So in terms of a standard emotional response chemical, it's going to run out after about 30 seconds. So unless it's a craving, all right? So if you're craving some food or something like that, it's about 13 seconds. Now, the good news, so what we would call the amount of time it takes to run out is the emotional refractory period, right? So this is why, even if you're having a fight with one of your, say your partner or a friend or something like that, and you've kind of made up and you've agreed to just disagree or you've forgiven each other, if you're not careful and somebody says or does the wrong thing within that refractory period, you'll be instantly, it just goes, it's almost like you explode straight back into the same mood. It's like, and the reason for that is because the chemicals are still floating around, right? So it doesn't take much, almost like a spark, to reignite that emotional reaction. So that's what that is. But this is the good news, right? Because the emotions run out, it means that as long as you're not creating more of them, so if we look, if you know, eventually they're going to run out and you're going to feel better. The problem we have is that people tend to keep throwing another log on the fire. So what do I mean by that? I mean that essentially we have what we would call in NLP patterns, like strategies or kind of loops, all right? It's kind of another way of saying the same thing each time, which is that I have this pattern that was created a long time ago because something happened to me, and therefore the body now runs a particular program or pattern, which it then loops to keep me safe or to avoid that happening again. All right, so essentially I'll give you the simplest pattern that I know is someone that has anxiety. I have this pattern myself and other people have, but you can learn to understand. It's how we make sense of the world. And what people tend to do when they process information is they use the same representational systems to make sense of the world. So for the majority of people, we're visual people, right? About 63% of the population. And we go visual first, right? And you'll know if someone's going visual because they will look up. Now, if they're looking up one way, they're remembering something. And if they look another way up, then they're creating something new. Now, that's great, but it can cause some issues if you start remembering something or seeing something, pictures that are frightening in your mind, right? So they see that. And then what they tend to do, if you're someone that then is like me, is you come down and you start to make sense of it by having some inner thoughts. Like you start to speak to yourself, you analyze it, you're a thinker, right? And then all of that, the last part of the pattern then is the feelings, right? So you kind of come over here and you start to feel anxiety or any other emotion. Now, that will then loop, right? So essentially, you'll remember something, you'll speak to yourself, it feels bad. And then so you'll think some more because the emotion starts coming up. So I remember it a bit more and then I think about it more. And it's a loop, it goes round. So that's why we're stuck in a loop. It's an emotional loop or pattern. So if we're not careful, it does run out after 30 seconds. But if we keep running that loop, we keep making more and more of that chemical, which means we can get stuck in that loop for hours, days, weeks. And that's the thing. It can turn into, this is what depression is. Something happened to me. That was a very emotional moment. I have now made it mean something about me or the world. And now I keep thinking about that and running it and it feels bad, right? So that's it. As soon as I wake up, I remember that happened to me. It means this about my life and me. It feels bad. And all day long this is the thing. That is what depression is, right? So we need to break the loop and kind of sort that out. But essentially what we're talking about here is just your standard emotional thing. So what I'm trying to get at here is if we can interrupt the pattern long enough and actually at the most simplest form, just be with the emotion, right? If you could sit in the emotion for long enough, it would literally just disappear. It would just get used up. The chemicals get used up and you'd be like, oh, that's not such a big deal. But the trouble is, people will do anything to avoid feeling what they perceive to be a negative emotion. So what they do, they shove it down, they keep busy, they distract themselves, they'll numb the pain, whatever it is. And what happens is that emotion builds up, that kind of stress, that build up, that pressure cooker happens. And if it's done to an extreme and it's something like anxiety, that's why people have things like panic attacks, because it's just so much. And then when the final sort of straw breaks the camel's back, we kind of go into a full-on panic and all that emotion is getting released. So what I've done is I've created a series of videos that are going to help you to kind of interrupt the pattern and release that. So I'll put the links underneath if you can't find them yourselves. But at the most basic form, I encourage you to just start to allow yourself to feel whatever comes up. And if you sit with that and you have compassion towards yourself and you kind of almost imagine giving yourself a hug a little bit and just sitting with it and asking that feeling, what is it trying to tell you? Then generally, after a couple of moments, it will disappear, not just because the chemicals will be used up, but because the chemical's there in the first place because your unconscious mind, who's about 6 years old and never grows up, is trying to tell you something. It doesn't happen by accident. It's trying to help you in some way or remind you or warn you. So if you just take the moment, think of the kind of metaphor of this, right? When you feel an emotion, it's that little kid in your head saying, I don't feel safe, or I need love, or I feel alone, or whatever it is it's doing. So if you actually just sit with it for a moment and give it what it needs and just acknowledge the feeling and ask it what it needs and then send it love or open your heart up or whatever it is and just breathe, you'd be really surprised at how quickly that disappears. And sometimes if you're doing it for long enough, it won't come back because that need has been solved. That pattern has now been resolved. The meaning has changed, right? What I've come to understand is that actually, especially with anxiety and someone that's been anxious for most of my life, it's not the world you're afraid of. It is, in fact, the emotion. It's almost like we're afraid of fear itself and not what the fear or the thoughts are telling us might happen. Because let's be honest, how often do those things actually happen that we go, what if that happens, right? It's the emotion we're running away from. But like if you put it in another metaphor, you've been running away from this monster your whole life. But if you turn around and you face it and you just hold your ground and you look at it, it starts to shrink. It starts to change. It starts to disappear until eventually it's gone, right? The chemical's gone, that's gone, and the meaning will suddenly shift. It's like, oh, I can look at this, I can feel this, and nothing happens. In fact, it just disappears. So instead of running away from it and distracting yourself and doing all the things that we do to try and cover it up, and this could be anything, a feeling of loneliness, a feeling of low self-esteem, whatever it might be, if you just sit with it and you listen to it and you feel it and you send it love and you basically do, or maybe do one of the techniques I'm going to put in the link below, it's done. It's gone and it doesn't come back. It's been changed because the meaning has changed. The loop or the pattern has been changed. So even if you step back into that loop, it doesn't feel the same. And it's just the feelings that keep us stuck and lost and alone and all the rest of it. So face your fears, right? And you don't need to spend hundreds and hundreds of pounds with a therapist. This is something you can do on your own, just by taking a moment to sit there. And, you know, if it's not happening right now, you can simply remember a time where you did feel somehow, you know, a way that you didn't enjoy feeling, a thing that happens to you again and again. So if you're an anxious person, for example, remember the last time you felt anxious and the feeling will start to come back up because your mind can't tell the difference. Is it happening now? Or is it really believes if you start to imagine something, it thinks it's happening. So the emotion comes up. But instead of running away from it or trying to do anything and everything to stop that, just stop and be with it. Maybe close your eyes and feel it. Where is it in my body? How old do I feel when I'm feeling that emotion? Most of the time we feel like younger children because that's when it was created originally. Maybe ask it what it needs or just give it some love. Just say it's okay in your mind. Be with it, feel it, love it. And within a few minutes, it will be gone. And chances are it won't come back if you do it enough. And that's without any techniques or anything special. It's just listening to your inner child, right? That unconscious mind, and loving it, being compassionate. Because at the moment, what most people do, if you imagine there's a kid saying, I need love, right? They just say, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to hear you. No, not interested. I'm running in this direction. I'm going to have a drink. No, out the room. You know, if you wouldn't talk to a child like that, but you're doing it to yourself, it's like child abuse in your own brain and body, right? So think about that. When the feeling comes up, it's just asking you for love and attention and support and reassurance. And if you give it that, it will go away. I hope that was helpful. Have a good day.